All right. So for your viewing pleasure, I have two conservative responses to critical theory. Oh, it's not where I want. There we go. Okay, so share my video. And like I mentioned, Edward, to the folks who are in here, these are like Christian or conservative responses to the video I showed you last week, and me trying to explain what critical theory was and how you could apply it to race or gender or all these different sorts of areas. And what I want you to think about is this a fair critique of critical race theory or critical theory? And is it effective, or how would this be helpful in engaging postmodernists or people who've embraced critical theory thinking? All right, so they're short, but I want you to respond to them. Isn't that interesting? At least according to these critics, they reject personal responsibility and freedom. And like I mentioned earlier, those were two of those trademark existential themes: personal responsibility, and with that, freedom. And so really interesting. So when I talk about those Hegelian seeds, the existential seeds of the individual about freedom and personal responsibility, and then we have the collectivist Marxist seed of no, it's all this group collective. You don't see yourself as an individual, you see yourself as part of a group. So I just love seeing those contrasts between existentialism and Marxism showing up again and again. In classic Marxism, of course, it pitted classes against each other, the working class against the bourgeoisie. But like I told you, that became ineffective in Western economies where even the proletariat were doing incredibly well economically, socially speaking. And so there was a pivot from class divide or class warfare to looking for other sorts of divides, whether that was race, gender, ability, etc.
Thanks for watching the Heritage.
Okay. Heritage Foundation is, I believe, kind of like a conservative think tank, and they engage in a lot of these current social and political economic issues. So what are your thoughts on that that one after what you've learned about critical theory. Welcome, Carlos.
Hey,
Hey, welcome, Autumn. Come on, that was a juicy video. That had to, I'm all spun up. That's gotta give you guys something to comment on.
Well, I would say I agree with a lot of things that they say, because critical race theory seems like artificial divides created that don't need to exist. So I would definitely agree with that, with what they were saying there.
Okay, anybody else?
yeah, I think sometimes the problems that they claim to be fixing, they're actually contributing to them. You know, like on the racism topic.
If you Google like Black Lives Matter manifestos or mission statements, I think you'll find it really interesting. Once again, it's a really hard movement to kind of pin down because it was so sort of grassroots and just sprung up in lots of different venues. There's not like a leader or a head of it. But if you look at some of the mission statements, you can just like mark off the check boxes of what we've described in critical theory. But I want to contrast that with the general population and the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. So one is a critical race theory ideology. The other is simply a sentiment that, of course, Black Lives Matter. We shouldn't even have to say that, but the reason people are feeling the need to say it is because they feel like our culture is acting like they don't. So I think that's super interesting. What about that little quip at the end, like, what can we do about it? So one of the suggestions was speak up. I'm all for speaking up, but I want it to be speaking up from knowledge, not from ignorance. That's part of why I spent so much time trying to go over this with you. I want you to have knowledgeable responses and critiques, not just because you heard on Fox News or One American News that this was bad and we shouldn't like it. So I want you to know why you believe it's dangerous if you think it is. Or if you think there's value to it, what you think the value is, and how can you keep the value without taking the whole package. The second was question your schools on the curriculum and what they're teaching. Now, I'm all for parental involvement and us being involved in making sure what our kids are being taught, but you can imagine the kind of culture wars you can have over curriculum, right? And depending on where you are in the country and what the school boards are approving. And so we have a big fight over, well, whose version of American history are we going to teach? And then that was the third point they brought up was about, we need to teach true American history. Well, once again, back to postmodernism, who's true American history? Are we willing to hear everybody's perspective on what happened in this country, or are we just wanting to hear from one point of view, one source, etc.? Any comments on my comments? All righty.
I mean, I have another comment on the end of the video that you brought that up. I thought it was funny because they talked about what America was built on, right? And I think that goes back to like more modern, modern versus postmodern, right? And I just thought that that opposition was kind of, it was kind of showing in the video, like they're like, we have to hold to modern principles or something, because essentially that's what it sounded like to me, because postmodern is coming in. So that's just something that I took and was like, huh, that's interesting.
Thank you, Edward. That makes me happy. That's, I think, a spot on observation. And part of why I wanted you to understand the difference between modern thinking and postmodern thinking. And yeah, the Heritage Foundation definitely trying to bring us back to the shore. You've drifted too far out to sea. Come back, come back. But it's hard to get people to come back once they felt the wind in their sails. Okay, next video. This is made, I think, by that Prager Institute, which is, I think, or this may be a different one having to do with Family Values Association, but this one's definitely coming from a Christian perspective and why Christians should not buy into critical theory. And I put these, I made a lesson for week 14, so you can find it there. If you want to see what I was showing you.
You're in a conversation, someone says, since God cares about the oppressed, Christians should embrace critical theory because it's trying to eliminate oppression too. What would you say? Critical theory is one way our culture attempts to explain and confront power structures. Some Christians have embraced it as well. But what is it? To understand critical theory, we need to understand its two primary points. First, everyone can be divided into two groups, those who have power and those who don't. Second, those who have power always oppress those who don't. How do we know who the oppressed and who the oppressors are? According to critical theory, the categories of oppressor and oppressed are based on your group identity. Things like race, gender, religion, immigration status, income, sexual orientation, and gender identity determine whether we are oppressed or one of the oppressors. Of course, someone might be part of an oppressed group in one way, but one of the oppressors in another way. That's where the concept of intersectionality comes in. Intersectionality seeks to measure someone's level of oppression based on how many of these groups they identify.
We could actually do a test so you could see how oppressed you are as compared to how much of an oppressor you are, just by taking a survey and seeing what groups you identify with or belong to, which I don't know if that's a helpful or a harmful exercise, but we actually have tests or models that we can take to find out your intersectionality.
For example, a black man is less oppressed than a black woman, who is less oppressed than a black lesbian.
Do you guys know who the most oppressed of the oppressed are in our culture?
No.
Based on that last little scenario, take a guess. So we had a black man is oppressed, less oppressed than a black woman. And what was the third one? Or then a woman, and then a black woman is more oppressed than a white woman or a black man. So following that out to its logical conclusion, who do you think would be the most repressed or oppressed in our society? They also have the highest suicide rate in our society. Very good. Transgender, black, males to females. That's like the oppressed of the oppressed of the oppressed of the oppressed.
Critical theory. The degree to which you are oppressed determines your level of moral authority. The more categories of oppression someone identifies with, the more moral authority they have. As a result, the experience and perspective of a gay black woman is more valuable than the experience and perspective of a straight white man, regardless of what they have to say. And in the same way, the more oppressed someone is, the less moral responsibility they have for their actions. Those who aren't part of oppressed groups, straight white men, gain moral authority by surrendering to those who haven't, the oppressed. This is called being woke. Some people claim that since Jesus cares about oppression, critical theory and intersectionality should be embraced by Christians. But critical theory and intersectionality are not consistent with Christianity. And here are 3 reasons why. First, critical theory offers a different view of humanity than Christianity. Critical theory claims that our identity as human beings is rooted in things like race and gender. Features
And remember, for Marx, your identity was based on class. So now it's just pivoted to these other identity issues. Also, remember, in Marxism, it's a materialistic based worldview. They don't believe in a soul or a spirit or a God. Basically, you have this life to live. You die and it's over. The only way you carry on is through your progeny.
that differ from person to person. The Bible grounds our identity as human beings and the value every human has in the fact that we are created in God's own image. This is something every human being shares. Critical theory pits some groups of people against other groups based on their status as oppressors or oppressed. The Bible says that we are all equal before God, created equal, equally valuable, equally guilty of sin, equally deserving of punishment, and equally able to find grace and mercy in Jesus. Which leads to the second point. Critical theory offers a different view of sin than Christianity. The Bible identifies sin as anything that violates God's design for people, including unjust oppression of other people. But critical theory identifies sin only as oppression. As a result, advocates of critical theory would see biblical practices such as discipleship, correction, leadership, and reproof as sinful assertions of power if the speaker is among the oppressors, and would excuse sins like jealousy, anger, hatred, bitterness, unforgiveness, or envy among the oppressed. The Bible says that we are all guilty before God, regardless of social status, race, or economic situation. The Bible condemns oppression as one of, but certainly not the only way in which humans rebel against God. Because critical theory gets the problem wrong, it also gets the solution wrong, which leads to the third point. Critical theory offers a different view of salvation than Christianity. According to the Bible, because we are all equally guilty of sin, salvation can only be found in Jesus through repentance. Our hope is found in being forgiven of sin. Because critical theory teaches that oppressors are guilty and the oppressed are not, salvation for the oppressed is found not through repentance, but in social liberation here and now. Their hope is only through activism. In other words, critical theory has a completely different understanding of who we are, what the problem is, and how to fix it than Christianity. So next time someone, surely with good intentions, tells you that Christians should embrace critical theory because Jesus also cares about the oppressed, remember these 3 things. Critical theory offers a different view of humanity. Our identity is in our status as image bearers and children of God, not in our race, gender, income, or immigrant status. Critical theory offers a different view of sin. Oppression is wrong, but it is a symptom and not the disease. Critical theory offers a different view of salvation. We cannot solve our biggest problem. Jesus can. Our hope is not in our circumstances on earth, but our destiny in eternity. Or what would you say? I'm Joseph Backlund. Thanks for watching.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to add this
You're in a
one for
conversation
future.
and someone asks, should Christians support Black Lives Matter? What would you say?
Okay. So talk to me about that second video. What'd you think?
It's
I
almost like the
think-
exact. Oh, go ahead, Carlos.
No, you, because I gotta finish my thing of thought. So go for
Okay.
it. Take it away.
Perfect. I find it interesting. Like it's the exact opposite of existentialism. You know, like put me in a group, put me in a class, you know, and tell me what I am, as opposed
It is.
to I'm my individual. You can't tell me what I am. I am what I am.
Isn't it wild? And
Yeah.
we have both movements converging in our country right now. I mean, in the world, but really manifest in the United States at the moment. Yeah, I'm just geeking out about it, just kind of like as a observer of seeing these philosophic ideologies just being manifest by huge segments of the population. It's powerful. I mean,
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
go for it, Carlos.
What would you say would be like the in between, or what would you say like the synthesis, the antithesis of both those ideologies?
Oh yeah, it's so interesting. Someone actually commented on that the last class we had, the video I posted on critical theory, and actually I got two posts. One basically just said it's from the pits of hell, and it's trying to replace one repressive system with an even more repressive system, possibly. The second comment was an answer to your question, Carlos. They said the only way to reconcile the individual and the community was through the Trinity. And they didn't elaborate, but I really like that answer. And I totally agree. It's in us being reconciled to God that we are collectively partakers of the divine nature, and for the first time can be connected not just to God, but to other human beings in a deep and meaningful way. But it also allows us to be our true selves, ones that aren't the slaves of sin. So we have connectivity and authenticity simultaneously.
I like it.
I guess something that like I thought was really interesting is it possible for like a Black woman to be an oppressor? Like, let's say
Yes,
she
in
owns
fact,
her,
do you know what a turf is?
no.
Let me type it in chat so you can see what I'm saying. A turf. A turf is a transgender excluding radical feminist. So if you had a Black female feminist that was prejudiced against transgender females, she would be an oppressor. Does that make
So,
sense?
yeah, that does make sense. I just think that it's strange, the categories for oppressors and non-oppressors. I think oppression would go, I would argue, beyond just ethnicity and beyond just gender. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it could be because you're disabled or handicapped. That would also give you morality points or oppressor points, or oppress points, not oppressor points, sorry.
Yeah, I guess depending of oppression, anybody could be an oppressor.
Yes, and this could change depending how you moved around the world. Although because of British imperialism and European colonialism, there still can be an overarching white male global oppression, not just in European or North American countries. I mean, you
Yeah.
could see it in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and other places. But you can imagine if you were in Japan, the dominant group there is going to be white, male, Japanese over a certain age and probably over a certain income. They're going to have more power and control than Japanese women, certainly more than foreigners. It's a monistic culture. So unlike America, you don't have the incredible diversity and plurality that we have here. Same thing in China. There's over 50 different ethnicities in China. We often, looking at it from America, we just think, oh, the Chinese, they're this one collective conglomerate, but you have all these subgroups and ethnicities, and the Han Chinese have been ethnically dominating and subjugating these other ethnic groups for, I think, several hundred years now, at least. I'd have to check my Chinese history, but the Han ethnic Chinese group dominates in China right now. Fascinating. I have such mixed feelings about that video. I guess technically I agree with the data or the facts of what they're saying, but I also think it was just painting it so black and white, and I don't think that was really fair. I think there's a lot of nuances of critical theory that are of value personally. I like the questions they're asking. I don't like their solutions, but I do think the questions are of value, and we shouldn't be afraid to check ourselves and ask, am I part of an oppressive class, or am I part of a privileged class? A lot of Americans, especially that are in those dominant groups, aren't even willing to ask themselves that question. And you could say, well, because there are no distinctions, we're all equal, we're all Americans, we all have the same opportunity. Or you can say, well, it's uncomfortable to see yourself as part of a group that benefited off the oppression of other groups. So I guess that's where I would start is, are you able to accurately evaluate the group or groups you're a part of? Can you see their potentiality for being oppressive, or the reality of them being oppressive? Or is that some Marxist myth to cause trouble in America? Talk to me, people. I feel like I'm talking to a wall.
I feel like, kind of like what you said, it's kind of tough because there are truths, but I also like, it seemed like there's a lot of generalization and like almost kind of generalizing and saying, if you are this, then you are this, and kind of like taking away that individualism.
Which is odd because they are all about the individualism, but they've kind of thrown all these critical thinking or critical theory people into their own category. And I don't know, maybe they should be in their own category, people that embrace it and run with the full spectrum of ideas. But once again, I think it's very few people that actually know what critical theory is and are consciously or intellectually pursuing those Marxist-like goals. I think most people are just caught up in they feel oppressed or downtrodden, and they're looking either to find out who's doing it, or maybe to get some relief or recompense.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I think it's like a problem because it demonizes like entire groups of people that might not be oppressing anyone. And then it kind of like justifies oppressing those people, the oppressors. So it's like, you know, like, especially like with race, I feel like there's a lot of like racism and sexism being directed at white males now in our culture because of this, because they're supposed to be the oppressors, but it really gives people an excuse to oppress white males. So it's kind of,
It
like,
does, and you deserve to be oppressed. And yeah, and it's unfortunate if you're a white male. Basically, in this critical theory, your only way out is to ally yourself with the oppressed groups and to basically speak out against your own group. Which that doesn't seem like a very good solution.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it seems like it's like, to me, it seems like it's like reverse racism. Like typically racism's been against minorities, and now it's like being directed the opposite way. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Let me roll this out for you, Caleb. in critical thinking terminology, it's not possible for the oppressed to be racist. Only those of the dominant culture can be racist. But see, if you look up racism in the dictionary, it's simply going to say when one uses race to condemn or promote an entire group of people. It has nothing to do with anything besides their race. That's racism. So anyone could be a racist by that definition. But in a critical theory definition, you have to be in a position of power in order for you to be a racist. Because they see everyone may have prejudice or bias, but it doesn't become the ugly racism until you have the teeth or power of your culture to back it up. That's the reasoning. But I guess that means like the Chinese could be racist against the Uyghurs because the Han, like my example, the Han ethnicity dominates the Uyghur ethnicity. And so in that geopolitical context, you could be a non-white male oppressor. You could be a Chinese male Han oppressor. But in America, it would mean Black people can't be racist, only white people can be racist. And that makes it very difficult, right, to have those conversations, especially when you're hearing blatantly racist comments coming from critical race theorists. Or like assuming things about you personally simply because of the group they've associated you with. I first became aware, or at least interested enough to research and study about 5 years ago, when a lot of this stuff was just starting to come into the, I don't know, it's almost like a civil rights movement 2.0 or something like that. It's like, I see it more of a continuum in American history and struggle. But I felt all this pressure coming on me. I mean, it's the same thing being male. How are you supposed to engage with feminists being a male without automatically being the enemy or the oppressor? And once again, your only out is to ally yourself with other feminists, where you've become someone who's talking about how bad males are and the virtues of the female. And once again, it's kind of a tough place because it's not like I got to choose to be male or female, or whether I got to choose the pigmentation of my skin. But then I began to ask the question about, well, what does it mean to even be white? And am I white? And I did this on my Facebook page. It was quite fascinating. I got such incredible ranges of, don't be stupid, just look in the mirror. That will tell you what you are, to, of course you're not white, Fred, don't worry about it. And I was just like, what in the world? Because I realized early on, it has nothing to do with the pigmentation of my skin. I mean, I shouldn't say nothing to do with it, but I think it has much more to do with this identity or how you've been labeled or associated. And I realized that's part of probably why I comport myself and have the appearance I do, because there is like an intentional disassociation with what I would call white America or white corporate American males, that I don't want people to look at me and assume that I'm a part of that group. Does that make sense? Years ago, I was teaching a humanities class, and we were going through different genres and styles of art, and we were getting more towards the contemporary period. And in my online classes, it's one of the few places where I'll often get equal amounts of Black and white students in my courses. Usually in the traditional classes, I might have the occasional or a few Black or African-American students. But in the degree completion program, sometimes I would have a majority of African-American students to my white students. Anyways, one of my black older students, he was probably in his 50s, asked this question in my arts class. And it was such a naughty question, but I loved it. He asked me innocently, he said, Professor, can white people create black art? And as you can imagine, the class immediately polarized, and all my white students said yes, and all my black students said no. It was like the OJ trial all over, except having to do with art. And we had a great discussion about it, and people had lots of great little stories about the white students would talk about their white nephew who could rap just as good as any black man, and yada, yada. And black people would talk about how, no, he doesn't understand the struggle, he doesn't understand the pain, so he can't express it in his music, yada, yada, yada. And when I had let this go on for about 15, 20 minutes, I stopped it because we weren't going anywhere. And I said, do you understand? We're trying to have a conversation, but we have not defined what black art is. And if black art is art made by black people, then of course white people can't make it by definition. But if black art is a style or a genre or a technique, well, then anyone who is willing to engage in those guidelines or parameters can make black art. And that's part of the power I told you about. Get people to define your terms before you get into a knockdown, drag them out argument with them. You'll save everyone a lot of time. And then once we define those terms, the whole class just lined up and was perfectly fine. End of debate, end of discussion. So I think we could do similar things when we bring these topics into the culture. And so here's a couple suggestions I have for you. And I put these also in lesson 14 in case you want to look at them later. Can you guys see my share screen?
Yeah.
I looked in our school library, and we actually have an ebook and I think a hardback version of John Stott's Christian Counterculture, that book I told you about the other day. So if you click on that, it will probably make you use your school login to the library, but it's basically his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. And I am fully in agreement with John Stott. And if we would simply live out the Sermon on the Mount, we would be so radically different than not only our culture, but other Christians of our day. And it would be transformative. But a lot of people see the Sermon on the Mount as too idealistic, or it's for kingdom living, and that's how we're going to live after the millennial setup. But I disagree. I think Jesus said those things and he meant them. Now, believe me, through the strength of our own will and self-discipline and desire, I do not believe we can fulfill the Sermon on the Mount. But if we are indwelt by the Holy Spirit and we have God's own power and love indwelling us, then I think it's how we're expected to live and how we're to treat one another. 1 Peter 3:15, that's the classic apologetics verse. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh, what is the reason of the hope that is within you, with meekness and fear. And that word answer in the Greek, if you look it up in your Blue Letter Bible or lexicons, that's the word apologia. So be ready to give an apologetic or an answer. And we're not giving them a reason of all the facts or evidence or data. We're giving them a reason why we hope. And remember, like Paul talks about in Romans, is it Romans 8 or 9? He talks about we hope for that which we have not attained or achieved. Why do we have hope in the promises of God? And my recommendation, and I don't care if you're living in ancient, medieval, modern, postmodern times, pre-modern times, personal testimony is powerful. Think about it in context of existentialism. When you share your journey with someone or your encounter with God, people have every right not to believe you or to think you're crazy or whatever. But what they don't get to do in an existential world or postmodern world is they don't get to tell you you're wrong, because that's your truth. That's your experience. So personal testimony, I think, is crazy powerful, and it's virtually unassailable by postmoderns. Now, they can choose not to believe it or believe you, but they can't tell you your experience isn't real because it's your experience. So I always think personal experience is a powerful apologetic tool. The second is that lifestyle evangelism piece, that it's not something we grab a rack of tracts and we go door to door, or we've got our Romans road and we're out looking for notches in our Bible, but this is a day in, day out, 24/7. The way we do our jobs, the way we're on our sports teams, the way we treat people in traffic, the way we are at the supermarket, how we are at church, in our homes, that we exhibit the love of Christ in all that we do. And when we're in the flesh, we confess it, we turn from it, and we ask forgiveness if we've hurt people when we were out of our right mind or out of our fellowship with Christ. And I think you'll see when you do that, you can engage people wherever they are. And the final thing I would say, we have to show love. First, our love to God, then our love to each other as believers, and then letting that love flow out from God through the church, through us into the world. And those are powerful things. Part of how other people have tried to deal with this in the past is to like target specific groups and to cater their ministry to those groups. And if that's your calling, I would just see it like a missionary going off to Japan or Papua New Guinea or Africa or wherever you're going. But instead of going to these other ethnicities or global groups, you're targeting subcultures or subgroups within our own country or our own society. So for example, this was probably 20 years ago. Is that about when the Goths were in full swing? It's getting a little fuzzy in my memory, but there were quite a large Goth community here in San Diego, and this one pastor had such a heart for them that he actually took on the appearance and the persona of a Goth, and he actually started a Goth church out at Scott Memorial West. I forget what it's called now. They changed their name, but it used to be a part of, that's what Shadow Mountain came out of, and our school was founded by that church years ago, back in 1970, I believe. Anyways, he came and spoke at our school to try to give us ideas with how to work with, I believe it was Generation X or the millennials back then, 20 years ago, I can't remember which. But his suggestion was that we kind of cater to where our students are at. And some faculty were open, others were like, no, we need to bring the students to where we're at. We don't need to go to where they're at. And you can wrestle with that dilemma too. But I thought it was interesting. I'd never seen a pastor in like a Matrix style full black trench coat and mascara and eyeliner and dyed black hair and pale complexion and some edgy black t-shirt. And he was very hip and cool and all that. And I think he ministered to a lot of people. But I was thinking about myself. I was just thinking, well, for one, I'm not a Goth, but shouldn't I be able to minister to Goths too? Or do I have to look like a Goth to preach to Goths? You know, do I have to be a woman to preach to women? Do I have to be transsexual to share the love of God with transsexuals? And I don't think I do. I think what I need to be is to be authentically Fred, whoever that Fred is, and I should be able to interact with Black, Hispanic, transgender, goth, Marxist, critical race. I don't care, because the love of God is not bound up into those sort of group and category distinctions. And I can't keep chasing every new iteration or every new cultural or intellectual move. I really have to focus on being in right relationship with God myself, which then allows me to be in right relationship to, I don't care what group you're in. All right, I want to hear from you all. I want to hear some takeaways, because I don't want to keep talking about this after today.
I really like what you said, how like you have to before you going to different groups or different groups of people and trying to, I think you just have to be authentically yourself, and the way to that is through God, your relationship with him and growing that so that you can see clearly past different ideas and concepts that society's telling us, or that the groups are telling us, and you see people for who they are, and through that is like love. I think that's very deep and powerful, but it's something that like we will continue. It's like a cycle, because like we're not perfect, and we will continue to mess up, and that's what makes me and brings me closer to God, because there's just a never-ending cycle.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, comments? I know this isn't an evangelism class per se, but I'm not teaching you all this stuff so that you can beat up people in apologetic arguments. My whole intention of sharing this stuff with you is to try and help you have some empathy and compassion for people that aren't coming from your worldview or your perspective, and to at least understand what the conflict is about. But my hope for all of you is that you'll be aware of the issues, but that your love will be able to transcend it and to engage people beyond their ideologies, lifestyles, hostility. Think how many people have been hurt by the church or Christianity. How many people want to lash out? Can you take it? Or are you going to retaliate? Are you going to try to put them in their place? Quote the Bible at them, or tell them they're going to burn in hell, or whatever your touche is for them. And I just, my general rule is I don't argue with people. If someone has a sincere question about why is the Bible trustworthy, or why do you believe Jesus rose from the dead, or do you really believe in a young earth creationism, then I'm more than happy to talk to them in a non-argumentative, but try to answer their questions, as many as they have and as much as I know. But I'm not going to debate someone over Darwinian evolution or over higher textual criticism or any of these other topics, because I think when we do that, we just push people further and further and further into their position. But an honest answer, absolutely, I will go as much as I know, and if I run out of knowledge, I'll find someone that knows more than me on the topic to help. So yeah, please use any knowledge you've gained in this class in love, not as a weapon.
I know personally the knowledge from this class has helped me to, like, with the whole pandemic and everything.
Yes.
There's a big divide in my family, and I've seen that the more you fight, or the more you try to talk through human facts or human reasons, the farther we drift apart. And the more that you try to talk through the gifts and the fruits of the Spirit, the closer we are together.
It's wonderful.
So thank you for that, Fred.
You're welcome. I was so horrible as a young man, as an evangelist apologist, because I just like to argue with people. I didn't care about their souls or them as humans. I just wanted to win arguments and get jewels in my crown. I was so self-centered and self-righteous. It was painful. And I just shudder thinking of some of the encounters I had with people over the years. And hopefully God will find a way to use it to his glory. But yeah, I'm no more of that stuff for me, Lord willing. I just want to love people. And but part of loving people is also to warn them of the danger, whether that's of their lifestyle or their belief, or I don't just sit by and watch people I care about running headlong into desolation and destruction. It doesn't mean they're going to listen to me, but they at least know I was warning in love, not in anger or fear, but because I love you. I don't want you to hurt yourself or others.
I think that's an excellent point you brought up. People don't often think of love in that sense, and they think of love as being like, oh, well, I just want you to be happy, so I'm gonna love you like this. But no, love is caring for the person so much that you don't care that you may be embarrassed or something, to let them know what they need to know.
Yeah. Right. And I think people are pretty good about telling when we're confronting them or challenging them, if we're doing it in judgment or if we're doing it because we care. Did I ever tell you the Anglo-Saxon root word of care? It's kara, which means to suffer with. So when we tell someone we care, it literally means we are willing to suffer with you. And when we tell someone we don't care, it means I'm not willing to suffer with you. I know a lot of people, I have a linguist friend that's always getting on my case, and he says, Fred, you can't use language that way. That's not how people use the words today. You have to use the common. I said, well, quite frankly, I think that's exactly what that word still means today. People just don't think about it. And I think we should think about what words like care and love mean. Are you willing to suffer with the other? Are you willing to put other people's interest over your own? For me, I hope some of you check out that John Stott book. It really helped me when I'm talking, good Lord, I left the church in 80. And part of it was because I just saw it becoming so political and just so much hypocrisy. And part of what encouraged me to keep walking with Jesus and keep studying while I was away was that book by John Stott, that Christian Counterculture, which really is a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. And I just fell back in love with it and with Jesus. And I was like, okay, there's other ways to be a Christian than being part of a mega or a politically motivated or run church. Eventually, Jesus brought me back to a church and a little fellowship. I didn't realize it could be like that. But over the last year, it's been especially rough for a variety of reasons. Okay, we will have another class on Wednesday. On Monday, I'm going to be traveling. I get to go to my happy place this weekend. I'm so excited. So use Monday to work on your signature assignment, and please get me any more of those critiques. If you have them outstanding, let's get those all done. Edward, I made you a special offer with your signature assignment for metaphysics. If I sent you a note in metaphysics, save you some work. So we're gonna, and then I believe it's the 28th, a week from Wednesday. Even though I don't have a final on the schedule, I want to have a Zoom final. But the way the final is going to work is we're just, each of you is going to be expected to share something, and we're just going to go through, and I want you to tell me what you got out of this class. Okay. So it's kind of a reflective piece final. What did you get out of this class, and how can you apply it to your life? You can make little notes if you want, or you can just speak from the top of your head. I'm fine either way. So one more class on Wednesday. Any more topics, apologetic topics you want to address? And I will try to cover them in our last class. It can be theological issues, it can be ethical issues, it can be culture war issues, whatever you want. What do you guys think about all this all this cancel culture stuff going on? I just saw Costco this week said they're no longer going to carry the My Pillow guys pillows, and and now a lot of my conservative friends are saying they're not going to shop at Costco anymore. And I'm just like, wait. And they're doing it because of cancel culture. So it gets so weird and self-referential. So you have people canceling each other out because of their beliefs, and then corporations following a set of beliefs get canceled out by people that disagree with those beliefs. And so I don't know who started cancel culture, because I grew up evangelical fundamentalist, and we've been practicing cancel culture my whole life. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to go to movies growing up, and it didn't matter what kind of movie it was. And the reasoning was because if you support with your money those movie theaters, maybe next week they'll show filth that is going to infect the minds of your community. And you help support that theater by going to watch a Disney movie or whatever. And I was like, what? I was just a kid. I just do what I was told. But yeah, that's to the extent they took it. When I will never forget when Disneyland extended medical rights to same-sex partners. It was before same-sex marriage was legal. My church basically said, we're never going to Disneyland again. And I'm like, because they're giving healthcare benefits to relationships you don't agree with? And they're like, absolutely. I was like, okay. But now we have it in other ways, right? We had, was it Major League Baseball is taking the All-Star game out of Georgia because of their voting legislation? I think that's why.
That one's silly though, because it's like other states, and Colorado has voter laws that are even more like the laws that Georgia just voted in. Colorado, where they moved the All-Star game, has stronger voter ID laws and of the same kind that Georgia just voted in. So it's like, why are you moving it to a state that has more of what you're calling racist, if that's truly racist?
Yeah, they need to come to California or New York. Yeah, you're right. It's and where do you stop, right? I mean, where do you draw the line? Holy cow. But I realize I've been doing it more on an ethical level. I'll never forget, I read Singer's book, Animal Liberation. That was a wild one. I never saw a book on animal rights before, and I was horrified. I had no idea what we did to animals in this country for tests, and it mostly was the cosmetic industry. So women wouldn't get rashes when they put on their makeup and rouge and mascara. They would use these products on like shaved rabbits and dogs and put the stuff in their eyes to see how bad it burned. And I was just so horrified. And he had a list of companies in the back, and one of them was Procter and Gamble. And I have not consciously bought a Procter and Gamble product since I read that book. So I think that's kind of like cancel culture. And they even made my favorite deodorant, Old Spice for men. And I'm just like, no more Old Spice for Fred. But if I researched into the other products I used, I'm sure I would be horrified. I'm quite frankly afraid to look, or I'd have to be making my own soap and growing my own food probably. When you think of the ethics or lack thereof in the food industry and clothing industry and housing and cell phones, and I mean, how much slave labor or sweatshop labor has gone into my consumer lifestyle. So, but I don't want to talk about my issues. I want to talk about your issues. Anything for me for Wednesday? You guys got to have something you're interested in. What about women in ministry? What about what version of the Bible to use? What about, we already did a little bit on healing or the sign gifts. We talked a little bit about Reformed theology, but
I mean, I'm down to talk about women in ministry because I'd like to hear other views on that.
I have some interesting new thoughts on that topic. I've been working Witten pretty good. He's not ready yet to share the throne. Although I think Steve has a very healthy view. Let's see, what would he call himself? I think he calls himself a complementarian. That we're equal but complementary, not the same. And we have different roles and duties and abilities, etc. Anything else?
I know that was why I was vegetarian for a while, because I was doing some research on the animal cruelty.
Yes.
And it's just you're right, it's just terrifying, it's just ugly. And I remember when I was up in Humboldt, I asked my philosopher in my philosophy teacher in class, like, why, how is animal testing legal? Like, how is that even? And he said, well, I remember I don't remember word for what he said, but basically it was because animals aren't able to speak and they don't have a conscience, we can do whatever we want. And
this was a professor at Humboldt?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah, and that's exactly what he said. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Was that their position?
No.
Okay.
No, that wasn't his position, no.
It doesn't sound like a Humboldt professor's position.
No, yeah, he was actually vegetarian.
Okay.
Vegetarian. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. And
I mean, I'd be vegetarian too, but I also care about the lives of plants.
Yep. And that was exactly what I was gonna say. Is like, where do you draw the line? And exactly to the point, it's like, how far do you go and how far do you stop? Because I mean, I grew up on a ranch, and whatever I ate was, I raised it and I killed it. And it's like, well, how do I live with myself? How am I gonna point my finger at someone else and say, how is that even ethical? It's like, where do I draw the line?
I wish more people had that ranch or farm country experience, though, where they at least made the association of where food came from and how it gets to us. Because so
Yeah.
many people are just so detached. They have no concept of,
Yeah, it's pretty, and that's interesting that you said that, Fred, because a lot of people ask me, well, how do you live with yourself when you slaughter your own animals? And I'm just like, well, I think I have a different relationship to it. I have an appreciation for the food that I have. It's not like, it's not this numbing overconsumption of like, just buy the meat, just buy the meat, just buy the meat, and you don't appreciate how much of a blessing it is and how much of a sacrifice this animal's doing.
you know,
And at the same time, it's like thanking God for creating this for us. It's just a deeper spiritual. It's yeah. To your point, Fred. Yeah.
yeah. Anything else? This isn't really an apologetic issue, but do you guys know the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't know what any of those are.
Maybe I should talk about that in my ethics class because they're not coming up with any topics. Basically, cultural appropriation, people usually get accused of it when they're using either regalia or styles or music or fashion of a culture or ethnicity that is not their own. And they're using it to make money or promotions or that sort of thing. So one example I saw recently was some dread-headed white kid at one of the state schools, and he got called out by a black student for cultural appropriation. And because he wasn't Rastafarian, he wasn't black, and yet he's running around in dreadlocks. And the poor white student was clueless. He had no idea what a Rastafarian was or cultural appropriation or anything else. He just liked dreadlocks, maybe he liked reggae music or whatever. But he was charged with that. Another white girl, this time wearing the big hoop earrings, got called out by a Hispanic chick for wearing Mexican earrings. That was part of her chola culture, and white girls shouldn't be playing.
See, but like that's where it's like you're trying to decolonize by being the colonizer, and you're just doing I don't know. To me, I just see that, and it's just like you're just doing the exact opposite of what you don't want to happen. Or I don't know if that came out right, but it's like you're creating categories and kind of making and controlling it. It's not really free, like the way it's free for the minorities to dress however they want to dress. And I don't know. That's something that I don't understand.
That's true in the sense, Carlos.
Imagine if someone that were white said that about something like, "Oh, you're black. You can't wear this clothes or wear your hair this style because that's a white hairstyle or something," and that would be considered totally racist. But you can say that dreadlocks are a black hairstyle that no white person can wear, and yeah, that's just absurd.
Now, I am okay with people getting called out for cultural appropriation where they are blatantly using some other culture's whatever and not even giving credit to it, almost acting like, yeah, I came up with, with this stuff when it may have 1,000-year-old tradition in China or Africa or some other place. But I don't know. On the one sense, it's flattering and a compliment, right? When people like the music or dress or style of your culture or subculture, and you have more influence. And so I don't know, it becomes tricky. Like, for example, I never heard Eminem being accused of cultural appropriation.
Oh, wow. That's true. That's true.
But I think the reason why is he had street cred because he grew up in those neighborhoods. He grew up in those communities. He wasn't black, but he knew what it was like being born poor and having to struggle. So somehow And I don't know if it was just because of his talent or his white suburban audience of disenfranchised white youth who wanted to be rappers or whatever. I don't know. It was a weird phenomenon. You ever hear his song White America?
Oh yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I saw him do that at the Black Grammys or something one year. It was truly something. Anyways,
And for me also, it just goes down to like, well, what I always had trouble with is like, okay, but that's like, how do you determine the fact? Like, just, I think to your point, like how you said, understanding different terms from different people and what they mean, because at some point it's just other people's opinions, and then they rule that opinions on other people, and it's like, well, how do you determine that? Because then we're just in this pool of just opinions.
yes, and it becomes a theory off in this postmodern time, which is really interesting. And depending whether you're buying into existentialism or critical theory, I mean, it's still coming down to the individual versus the collective. All right, well, we're out of time. All I got is women in ministry. So if you want to talk about anything else, email me or you can bring it up on Wednesday. Have a good afternoon.